Imagine being so afraid of your own child that you install a deadbolt on your bedroom door at night. This was the reality for a Wisconsin mother named Shelly. Her only son, Derek Campos, was once a sweet baby she nearly lost to illness. But over the years, he grew into someone she feared. Someone who would eventually commit a crime so shocking it left a community reeling. At just 22 years old, Derek murdered his fiancée, 18-year-old Maisie McCullough, the mother of his child. But how did a boy who survived against the odds turn into a killer? Today, we trace the story of Derek Campos, from a spoiled child to a convicted murderer. And before we dive into this case, please be kind enough to support my channel. Subscribe, like the video, and stay active. It really helps. I'll be grateful to you for that. Now let's begin. The story begins in Marshfield, Wisconsin, on November 13, 1991, the day Derek Campos was born. His mother, Shelly, was just 19 at the time, a young college student in her first year of nursing school. She wasn't ready to be a mother. She still dreamed of finishing her studies, enjoying her youth, and building a career. But when she found out she was pregnant, her world shifted. The father of the baby disappeared as soon as he learned the news. Alone and afraid, Shelly considered her options. But deep down, she couldn't bring herself to end the pregnancy. She decided to raise her child, even if it meant giving up her own future. When Derek was born, she fell in love instantly. His tiny fingers, round cheeks, and bright eyes melted her fears. She believed she had made the right choice. But just 7 weeks later, her joy turned to terror. Baby Derek developed a severe respiratory virus and pneumonia. His condition declined so rapidly that he had to be airlifted to a hospital in Minnesota. Doctors told Shelly to prepare for the worst. Her newborn might not survive the night. She prayed desperately, clinging to hope. And then a miracle. Derek pulled through. Against all odds, he survived. For Shelly, it was the moment that defined everything. She was so grateful, so relieved, that she made herself a dangerous promise. Her son would never go without. Whatever Derek wanted, he would get. She would never risk upsetting him, because she could not risk losing him. At first, it seemed harmless. Derek was a cheerful toddler, riding his tricycle, playing ball in the park, and laughing with his mother. But behind that laughter, habits were forming. Shelly never told him no. If he wanted a toy, he got it. If he threw a tantrum, she gave in. If he refused rules, she backed down. Slowly, Derek began to believe the world revolved around him. By the age of 7, the changes were undeniable. Derek wasn't just a stubborn child anymore. He was explosive. He shouted at his mother, defied her orders, and even lashed out physically. One day, at a shopping mall, the situation spiraled out of control. Derek spotted a toy truck he wanted. When Shelly calmly said no, reminding him he already had plenty of trucks at home, Derek exploded. He grabbed the toy, smashed it on the floor until it shattered, then screamed that he would break more toys unless she gave in. Other shoppers stopped and stared. Parents shook their heads in disbelief. Shelly's face burned with shame and fear. In the end, she bought the broken toy and another to replace it. That day, Derek learned something dangerous. With enough rage, he could get anything he wanted. And Shelly learned something too. She had lost control of her son. But instead of changing course, she doubled down on her promise. She gave in again and again, blind to the fact that she was raising a child without boundaries, without discipline, and without fear of consequences. And that was only the beginning. As Derek grew older, his behavior became harder to dismiss. To outsiders, he looked like a normal child. But at home, Shelly noticed things that set him apart. He didn't play with toys like other kids. He wouldn't crash cars together or build towers of blocks. Instead, he lined his toys up neatly, row by row, and sat staring at them in silence. When he grew bored, he carefully put them back in their boxes, untouched, unplayed with. Even mealtimes showed something unusual. Derek refused to eat with his hands. Burgers, sandwiches, potato chips, foods most children devoured with messy fingers. He insisted on eating with a fork. Shelly brushed it off as quirky. She didn't consider that her son might have underlying behavioral or developmental issues that needed attention. She simply called him different. At school, Derek's struggles grew clearer. He found it nearly impossible to make friends. When classmates did approach him, he often lashed out. Once, when a boy picked up one of Derek's toy cars during a playdate, Derek flew into a rage. He knocked the boy to the ground and began pummeling him, screaming, "Those are mine! You can't touch them!" Shelly rushed in and dragged her son away, but instead of confronting him, She minimized the incident when the other parent arrived. "Just boys being boys," she said, covering up Derek's aggression. Once again, Derek faced no consequences. By age 9, Shelly's life had narrowed to 2 roles, caretaker and appeaser. But everything changed when she met a man named Robert. Robert was older, stern, and believed in discipline, the very opposite of Shelly's permissive parenting. After several months of dating, she decided it was time for him to meet Derek. The introduction was disastrous. Robert knelt down, pushed Derek's hair aside, and smirked. "I'm just checking to see if you've got the mark of the devil." It was meant as a joke, but it struck a nerve. Shelly laughed nervously, admitting to Robert that sometimes she felt like something dark lived inside her son. Derek said nothing, but the moment burned into his memory. When Robert and Shelly eventually married and he moved into their home, he decided to take control. He believed Derek needed rules, structure, and consequences. But Robert's methods were harsh. He enforced his will with an iron fist, barking orders and demanding obedience. For Derek, who had never faced boundaries in his life, the change was unbearable. For Shelly, the situation was a nightmare. She tried to balance both sides. She allowed Robert to enforce rules, but the moment he left for work, she undid it all. She apologized to Derek, bought him gifts, and showered him with affection to make up for Robert's strictness. The result? Confusion. Derek wasn't learning discipline. He was learning manipulation. He realized his mother would always side with him in the end. He just had to wait Robert out. The tension came to a head one Christmas morning. Derek had been begging for a PlayStation, and Shelly had bought one, placing it under the tree. On Christmas Day, Derek rushed to open it, but Robert stopped him. "Not until after breakfast," Robert said firmly. He set a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Derek and told him he couldn't leave the table until it was finished. But Derek hated eggs. He sat in silence, staring at the plate. Minutes turned into hours. By nightfall, he was still at the table, unfed and unopened gifts still waiting. Derek went to bed that Christmas with nothing. The next morning, when Robert left for work, Shelly rushed to comfort her son. She told him he could open his presents now, that everything was fine. Derek ripped open the PlayStation box, and then smashed the console to pieces in front of her. His rage was a message: "You failed me." And what did Shelly do? She bought him another one. That Christmas marked a turning point. The house was no longer a place of warmth and joy. It had become a battleground. Strict rules on one side, desperate appeasement on the other, and a boy growing stronger in his manipulation with each passing year. For Shelly, the walls of her own home were starting to close in. As Derek stepped into his teenage years, the storm inside the Campos household only grew darker. The boy who once threw tantrums in stores now confronted people directly. His aggression had matured, and it was no longer just Shelly who felt the weight of it, it was Robert too. Arguments between the two men escalated into shouting matches. Sometimes Derek would throw things, slam doors, or pound his fists against the walls. Robert fought back with strict punishments, but Derek had no intention of submitting. And in the middle of it all was Shelly, torn apart, terrified of both the conflict and her son's wrath. The moment Robert left for work, Shelly would rush to her son's side. She apologized for Robert's harshness, showered Derek with love, and even slipped him gifts to smooth things over. Derek learned something powerful from this routine. His mother would always bend to him in the end. By age 15, Derek was the undisputed ruler of the household. Shelly lived in constant fear. She tiptoed around her own son, avoiding any action that might set off his temper. He insulted her regularly, mocking her failures, sneering at her growing dependence on alcohol, and sometimes threatening her outright. Shelly would later admit that she often felt like a hostage in her own home. And she wasn't exaggerating. The fear was real. Desperate, she tried one last option: therapy. She took Derek to a psychotherapist, hoping that finally someone would explain her son's behavior and guide them to solutions. But instead of a deep evaluation, the session was rushed. The therapist slapped on a diagnosis of depression and prescribed medication. For Shelly, it felt like a lifeline. For Derek, it became another chain. The medication didn't calm his aggression. It pulled him deeper into isolation. He withdrew, avoided conversations, and disconnected from reality. But his anger didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. By the time Derek turned 18, Robert was gone. Unable to withstand the constant battles, he walked away from the marriage. And now Shelly was left alone with her son. A son she loved deeply, but feared more than anything. Her nights became unbearable. She began locking herself in her room, sometimes with a deadbolt, convinced that one day Derek's rage would cross the line. Alcohol became her escape, the only thing that dulled the weight of her fear. But then something unexpected happened. Derek fell in love. Her name was Maisie McCullough, a sweet, bubbly girl 2 years younger than Derek. Maisie was everything he wasn't: sociable, kind, and full of warmth. To Shelly's astonishment, her son smiled again. He was attentive, gentle, even caring. For the first time in years, Shelly dared to hope. Maybe her son wasn't lost. Maybe love could tame the storm inside him. And soon, Shelly would have another reason to believe. Maisie was pregnant. When 16-year-old Maisie McCullough told Derek she was pregnant, he was stunned. But instead of abandoning her, Derek embraced the idea. For once, Shelly saw her son excited about something beyond himself. He promised Maisie he would be a good father, and when their son Gabriel was born, it looked as though he meant it. Derek doted on the baby. He changed diapers, bottle-fed him, bathed him, and rocked him to sleep. He called himself a stay-at-home dad, proudly claiming he would raise his son while Maisie finished school. Shelly watched all of this with relief. For the first time in years, she believed Derek had found a purpose strong enough to keep him grounded. But beneath that fragile surface, the old patterns were stirring. It started small. Derek began insisting that the curtains in the house remain closed at all times. He claimed he hated natural light. If Shelly or Maisie opened them, he would storm into the room, yank them shut, and start an argument. Soon, this strange obsession became a household rule. Then it spread to everything. Derek imposed a rigid daily schedule. Meals had to be eaten at set times, chores had to be done in a specific order, and even conversations had to follow his rules. To him, the house wasn't a home. It was a kingdom where he was king. Maisie, still just a teenager, bore the brunt of it. At first, she tried to please him, but his expectations grew more demanding. He scolded her for mistakes, shouted at her when she disagreed, and controlled her movements. She was allowed to attend school and her part-time job, but afterward, she had to come straight home. Friends, social outings, independence. Derek stripped it all away. Shelly saw this happening. She saw her son treating Maisie less like a partner and more like a prisoner. But just as she always had, she stayed silent. She had been too afraid to stand up to Derek when he was a boy, and now, as a young man, he terrified her even more. And Derek's cruelty didn't stop with Maisie. He turned his rage on his mother too. He mocked her alcoholism, insulted her failures, and threatened her life. One day, Shelly walked into the kitchen and found her son holding an AK-47 rifle. He pointed it at her and coldly said, "You'd better sleep with one eye open. One night, I'll shoot you or slit your throat." The threat was no empty warning. Shelly believed him. That night, she installed a deadbolt on her bedroom door. From then on, she locked herself in every evening, retreating like a prisoner hiding from her captor. Her fear deepened when Derek began asking questions about her life insurance policy. The implication was chilling. He wanted to know what he stood to gain if she died. The house, once her refuge, had become a cage. Shelly spent most of her time locked in her room with a bottle of alcohol for comfort, trying to numb the terror that filled her every waking moment. For Maisie, life became unbearable too. Derek's control was suffocating. His rages were unpredictable. She had lost her freedom, her safety, and her happiness. By the time she graduated high school, Maisie knew she had to escape. And one day she did. She walked out of the Campos home and never returned. She left behind the one person she loved most, her son Gabriel. She believed, in her heart, that leaving him with Shelly was safer than taking him along. But she underestimated the darkness that was closing in. For Derek, Maisie's departure was not the end. It was the breaking point. When Maisie left, Derek's world collapsed. Instead of accepting responsibility, he convinced himself that she had betrayed him. In his mind, Maisie wasn't just gone. She was with another man. And the thought of someone else raising his son, Gabriel, drove him into a dangerous obsession. He began pacing through the house, muttering under his breath like a mantra. "I won't let another man be the father of my son. I won't give him up." Shelly, who had seen years of her son's volatile behavior, recognized the danger immediately. She knew Derek was spiraling, but as always, fear kept her silent. She hoped it would blow over. It didn't. On September 7th, 2012, Shelly attended an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. When she returned home later that evening, she instantly knew something was wrong. Maisie's car was parked in the driveway. Odd, since the girl had left weeks earlier. The front door stood wide open, and an eerie silence filled the house. Stepping inside, Shelly's stomach knotted. She saw a trail of blood smeared across the hallway floor. At first, she tried to rationalize it. Maybe Derek had lost his temper, punched a mirror, and cut himself. But as she followed the trail, the truth came into focus. The blood led to the bathroom. A pool had gathered beneath the door. Her hands shook as she pushed it open. And there, inside the bathtub, was a sight she would never forget. 18-year-old Maisie McCullough lay lifeless, drenched in blood. Her throat had been slit. Multiple stab wounds marked her body. Defensive cuts covered her hands, silent testimony that she had fought desperately for her life. Shelly froze, her body locked in horror. For a moment, it felt like she was trapped in a nightmare, watching a scene unfold from a horror film. But it wasn't fiction. It was her reality. She staggered back, panic rising. Derek was gone. Gabriel was gone. The boy she had once sworn to protect had just destroyed everything. In a frenzy, Shelly dialed 911. Between gasps and sobs, she told dispatchers what had happened. Her son had killed Maisie and taken the baby. Police swarmed the house, collecting evidence, securing the scene, and launching an immediate manhunt. Derek was armed, dangerous, and unpredictable. And worse, he had a 2-year-old child with him. For hours, the entire community held its breath. Maisie's death was already a tragedy, but everyone feared what might come next. Would Derek harm his own son? Would he turn the weapon on himself? The search stretched into the night. Derek's face flashed across every television screen, every news site, every police bulletin. Finally, in the early morning hours of September 8th, hope appeared. At 5 a.m., a motel employee in Wisconsin Rapids called police. A man matching Derek's description had checked in with a small child. Officers raced to the scene, surrounding the building, preparing for a possible armed standoff. But then something unexpected happened. Before police could force their way in, Derek opened the door. With his hands raised, he surrendered without resistance. Inside the room, little Gabriel was found alive and unharmed, a small miracle amid the chaos. Maisie, however, was gone forever. With Derek in custody, investigators moved quickly. The crime scene had been brutal, but the evidence was clear. Maisie's blood was found on Derek's clothes and inside his car. The murder weapon, a knife, had not even been hidden. Every sign pointed directly to him. The autopsy revealed the full horror of Maisie's final moments. Her jugular vein and carotid artery had been severed. She had multiple stab wounds in her back, and her hands carried deep defensive cuts, showing how desperately she had tried to fight him off. It was a savage, personal killing. Not an accident, not a sudden push too far, but an eruption of controlled rage. While awaiting questioning, Derek was given his one phone call. To no one's surprise, he called his mother. On the line, his voice was strangely calm. He apologized for how things had turned out, insisted he hadn't meant for it to happen, and then, for the very first time in his life, said the words his mother had longed to hear. "I love you." Before hanging up, he begged her to take care of Gabriel. To Shelly, it was a heartbreaking echo of the boy she had once cradled in her arms. But to investigators, it was a glimpse into a manipulative young man who understood exactly what he had done. The case moved swiftly through the courts. Derek was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, as well as child abduction for taking Gabriel. At first, he pleaded not guilty, but the evidence left him little room to maneuver. Eventually, he accepted a plea deal: life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. But even behind bars, Derek's story didn't end. His darkness followed him into the prison walls. Not long after sentencing, authorities uncovered a chilling plot. Derek had allegedly tried to arrange a murder-for-hire scheme from inside the jail. He offered another inmate an AK-47, a car, and $4,600 in cash to kill a man he believed Maisie had been secretly seeing. Thankfully, the plan was never carried out, but it showed the disturbing depths of Derek's obsession. Even with Maisie gone, his rage still festered. In a bizarre twist, Derek later changed his legal name to Derek Campos, the same name as his young son. Some speculated he was trying to reinvent himself. Others believed it was his way of holding onto the only piece of love left in his life. Whatever his reasoning, it only added another layer of unease to an already unsettling case. As for Shelly, she was left to pick up the pieces. She gained full custody of her grandson, Gabriel, but she couldn't bring herself to live in the house where Maisie had been killed. Haunted by memories, drowning in guilt, she moved away and withdrew from the public eye. In her one public interview, given to Investigation Discovery for the episode Evil Lives Here, My Son's Prisoner, Shelly admitted the truth she had avoided for years. She had spoiled Derek. She had ignored warning signs. She had chosen silence instead of boundaries. And she had lived in fear of the very boy she had once sworn to protect. To this day, she struggles with a question no parent ever wants to face. Was my son born this way, or did I help create the monster he became? The story of Derek Campos, the boy who once survived against all odds, only to grow into a man capable of taking a life, is one that leaves us shaken. At its heart, it raises painful questions about parenting, discipline, mental health, and the choices we make when red flags are staring us in the face. For Shelly, what began as unconditional love turned into fear-driven parenting. When Derek was just 7 weeks old, she nearly lost him. Out of terror, she made herself a promise: never deny him, never upset him. But what felt like protection slowly became permissiveness without boundaries. Derek learned early on that anger got results, and no one ever corrected that lesson. This isn't to say Shelly is solely to blame. Parenting is complicated, and not every spoiled child grows into a killer. But this case shows how lack of discipline combined with untreated behavioral issues can set a dangerous pattern. Shelly's silence and fear allowed Derek's aggression to grow unchecked until it consumed not just him, but everyone around him. There's also a broader lesson about mental health. Derek showed unusual behaviors from an early age: obsessive play patterns, difficulty with social interaction, aggression beyond normal tantrums. These should have been addressed with professional evaluation. Instead, they were brushed off as quirks. By the time he was finally taken to a therapist, the diagnosis was rushed and incomplete, and the opportunity for real help was lost. For Maisie, the story is about the dangers of controlling relationships. She was just a teenager, full of hope, trapped by someone who wanted to dominate every aspect of her life. Many young people find themselves in toxic relationships without realizing how dangerous the signs are: isolation, control, verbal abuse, threats. Maisie's tragic death is a stark reminder of the importance of recognizing these red flags early and seeking help. And finally, this story is a warning to all of us about the cost of silence. Shelly knew her son was dangerous. She admitted she lived in fear of him. Yet she never reported him, never set hard boundaries, never got the consistent help he needed. That silence didn't protect him. It didn't protect her. And it certainly didn't protect Maisie. Today, Derek, now calling himself Gabriel, is serving life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Shelly is raising her grandson, haunted by the past. And Maisie McCullough, a girl with her whole life ahead of her, is gone forever. The lesson is clear. Love without boundaries is not love at all. Children need discipline, guidance, and accountability. Families need the courage to confront problems, not bury them. And when signs of abuse or control appear in relationships, they must never be ignored. If this story teaches anything, it's that ignoring red flags doesn't make them go away. It only gives them the chance to grow, until one day it's too late. Thank you for watching. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to subscribe and share it so others can learn from the tragic case of Derek Campos and Maisie McCullough. And remember, the choices we make as parents, as partners, and as individuals can mean the difference between life and death.